Carl Jung, the anima, the hidden woman within every man. What if the person you have been searching for your entire life has actually been living inside you? Think about it for a moment. That face that appears in your dreams, familiar yet unnamed. That stranger across the room who felt, somehow, like coming home. That relationship you couldn't explain to your friends. The one where you weren't just falling in love with a person, but with something larger, something mythic, something that felt like destiny. Why do so many men fall obsessively in love with someone they barely know? Why does infatuation so often outrun reality? Why do men idealize a partner, place her on a pedestal, and then feel the quiet devastation when she turns out to be human after all? Why do the same painful patterns repeat, relationship after relationship, as if some invisible hand were writing the script? Carl Jung believed these experiences were not simply about romance. He believed they were symptoms of something buried far deeper in the human psyche, something ancient, something that lives in every man whether he acknowledges it or not. He called this hidden force the anima, and once you understand it, you may never look at love, longing, or your own inner life the same way again. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life mapping the unconscious mind, that vast, dark ocean beneath our conscious awareness. Where Freud saw the unconscious as a storehouse of repressed desire, Jung saw something far stranger. He saw a living inner world, populated by figures, forces, and archetypes, patterns of being so old they seemed to belong not just to one person, but to the entire human species. Among these archetypes, Jung identified one that lived specifically within the psyche of every man. He called it the anima, the Latin word for soul. The anima, in Jung's framework, is the unconscious feminine aspect of a man's psyche, not a memory of a specific woman, not a fantasy invented by desire. Something structural, something built into the architecture of the masculine mind itself, the way a shadow is built into the existence of light. Jung proposed that every psyche contains both masculine and feminine qualities, but that culture, upbringing, and identity formation push a man to consciously develop his masculine traits while pushing the feminine ones into the unconscious. Those feminine qualities do not disappear. They do, not weaken. They simply go underground. And what goes underground in psychology, Jung warned, does not vanish. It waits. It grows in the dark. And eventually, it finds a way to surface, often in ways a man never expected and rarely understands. This is why most men never become aware of their anima directly. She does not announce herself. She does not appear labeled and explained. Instead, she appears disguised as something else. Entirely. She appears as a face in a dream. She appears as an inexplicable mood. She appears most powerfully of all as another person. Have you ever met someone and felt an overwhelming, almost irrational pull toward them long before you actually knew who they were? Jung would say that in that moment, you were not seeing a stranger. You were seeing a mirror. This is where the anima begins to shape the experience so many men call love, and so many men later call heartbreak. Jung proposed a concept that quietly explains an enormous amount of human suffering. He called it projection. Projection happens when a man unconsciously takes the inner qualities of his own anima, her mystery, her beauty, her wisdom, her wounds, and casts them outward onto a real, living woman. Suddenly, she is not simply a person with her own history, her own flaws, her own separate inner world. She becomes a screen onto which his own unconscious is displayed. This explains something almost every person has felt at some point, that dizzying, consuming sensation of falling for someone within days, sometimes hours, of meeting them. It is not that the connection is imaginary. It is that something enormous is happening beneath conscious awareness. The man is not only meeting her, he is meeting himself, refracted through her. Consider the ordinary story that repeats endlessly across generations. A man meets a woman. Within weeks, he is convinced she is different from anyone he has ever known, that she understands him in a way no one else could, that his life finally makes sense. He does not simply like her. He idealizes her. He builds a quiet mythology around her presence. Then, inevitably, reality intrudes. She has bad days. She disagrees with him. She reveals opinions. wounds, contradictions, an entire inner world that has nothing to do with his fantasy of her. And something in him breaks, not because she has changed, but because the illusion has. This is the mechanism behind so much heartbreak, so much emotional obsession, so many impossible expectations placed on real, imperfect human beings. The man was never only in a relationship with her. He was in a relationship with his own unconscious, projected onto her like a film onto a blank screen. And when the projection fails, when she cannot sustain the weight of being both a real woman and a living symbol, the disillusionment can feel like betrayal, even though nothing was ever promised. Jung did not see this as pathology so much as an unavoidable stage of psychological development. But he insisted that a man who never becomes conscious of his own projections is doomed to repeat this pattern indefinitely, chasing an internal image through an endless procession of external faces. To understand this more deeply, Jung offered a framework, a kind of psychological map, describing how the anima evolves across a man's inner life. He described 4 stages, each representing a deeper, more mature relationship to the feminine within. He named them Eve, Helen, Mary, and Sophia. The first stage is Eve. This is the most primal expression of the anima, rooted in pure biological and instinctual attraction. At this stage, a man's relationship to the feminine is largely physical, associated with fertility, desire, and the body. It is not shallow so much as foundational, the earliest layer of connection between masculine and feminine energy. Many men remain at this stage for much of their lives, relating to women primarily through instinct and attraction, without yet sensing the deeper psychological dimension underneath. The second stage is Helen, named for Helen of Troy, the woman whose beauty was said to have launched a war. At this stage, the anima takes on romantic and aesthetic qualities. She becomes an ideal, someone admired not only for physical presence but for charm, personality, and emotional allure. This is the stage of infatuation, of falling for an image, of the intoxicating early days of romance when a man feels as though he has discovered something extraordinary. It is a powerful stage, but still largely external, still largely projection. The third stage is Mary, representing the emergence of spiritual and devotional love. At this stage, the anima begins to embody virtues beyond physical beauty, compassion, loyalty, nurturing, warmth, moral depth. A man relating to this stage of the anima begins to seek not only pleasure or admiration, but genuine emotional partnership, a bond rooted in care rather than conquest. This stage often accompanies real maturity in relationships, a shift from wanting to be desired to wanting to truly connect. The fourth and final stage is Sophia, the Greek word for wisdom. This is the most evolved expression of the anima, no longer tied primarily to romantic longing at all, but to inner guidance, intuition, and insight. At this stage, the anima ceases to be something a man searches for outside himself. She becomes an inner voice, a source of creativity, discernment, and psychological depth. Jung believed that men who reach this stage of relationship with their own anima gain access to extraordinary inner resources, clarity, intuition, and a kind of wisdom that cannot be taught, only integrated. Most men move through these stages unconsciously, drawn toward different qualities in relationships at different points in their lives without realizing they are actually undergoing an inner transformation. Jung's insight was that this progression is not really about the women encountered along the way. It is about the maturing relationship a man has with his own inner feminine nature, expressed and mirrored through the outer world. But the anima does not only appear through other people. She also speaks through dreams. Jung considered dreams to be direct messages from the unconscious, and he paid close attention to how the anima appeared within them. She often takes the form of a mysterious woman, sometimes a stranger, sometimes someone half-recognized, guiding, warning, seducing, or simply watching. Her presence in a dream is rarely random. Jung believed she was attempting to communicate something the conscious mind had refused to hear. Alongside her, certain symbols recur with striking consistency across cultures and centuries. Forests appear dark and tangled, representing the unknown depths of the unconscious. Oceans appear vast and unfathomable, representing the emotional and instinctual realm. Caves appear hidden and enclosed, representing the womb-like origins of the psyche itself. The moon appears silver and shifting, traditionally associated with the feminine, with intuition, with cycles unseen by the rational, daylight mind. Rivers appear, flowing and transformative, carrying the dreamer from one state of being into another. Mirrors appear, reflecting not the world, but the self, forcing a confrontation with what has been hidden. These are not arbitrary images invented by an overactive imagination. Jung noticed them recurring across myths, fairy tales, and religious traditions from wildly different cultures that had no contact with one another. The maiden lost in the forest, the goddess who rises from the sea, the wise woman who lives in the cave and knows secrets no one else possesses. These stories, told across centuries and continents, seem to be describing the same inner encounter, dressed in different cultural clothing. Jung called these universal patterns archetypes, inherited structures of imagination, shared by the whole of humanity. This is why myths and fairy tales feel strangely personal even when they are ancient. They are not simply stories about faraway kingdoms and legendary heroes. They are maps of the inner journey every person must eventually take, whether they realize it or not. But why would this inner feminine figure matter so much? Why would ignoring her create real, lived suffering? To answer this, Jung placed the anima within a larger structure of the psyche. There is the persona, the mask a person wears in public life, the socially acceptable version of the self. There is the ego, the conscious center of identity. There is the shadow, the disowned, repressed parts of the self that a person refuses to acknowledge. And beneath all of it lies the vast unconscious, home to both the shadow and the anima. When a man refuses to acknowledge his anima, when he lives entirely through persona and ego, presenting only strength, control, and rationality to the world, he does not eliminate his feminine inner life. He merely exiles it into darkness alongside the shadow, and a neglected, unintegrated anima tends to express itself in increasingly disruptive ways. This is often where emotional numbness begins, a strange flatness beneath an otherwise successful life. This is often where loneliness sets in, even inside a crowded room, even inside a relationship. This is often where toxic patterns repeat, the same painful dynamic occurring with different partners, different circumstances, the same underlying wound. This is often where inner conflict festers quietly, a persistent sense that something essential is missing, even when nothing on the surface seems wrong. Jung believed that a man cut off from his anima becomes, paradoxically, more vulnerable to being controlled by her, not less. What is denied consciously does not disappear. It simply operates from the shadows, shaping moods, decisions, and relationships without ever being named. So what happens when a man begins, instead, to turn toward this hidden part of himself? Jung believed that genuine inner work could transform the anima from an unconscious force that controls a man into a conscious guide that serves him. This work rarely looks dramatic. It often looks quiet, even ordinary. It can begin with meditation, sitting with the mind long enough to notice what usually goes unheard. It can begin with attention to dreams, treating them not as nonsense, but as messages worth interpreting. It can begin with creativity, painting, writing, music, anything that allows the unconscious to speak in its own symbolic language. It can begin with journaling, tracing patterns in one's own emotional life honestly, without flinching. It can begin, perhaps most importantly, with solitude, real solitude, free from distraction, where a man can finally sit with himself long enough to hear what has been trying to reach him all along. Jung called this larger process of psychological development individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming a whole, integrated self, rather than a fragmented collection of masks and denied parts. Integrating the anima is not about becoming less masculine. It is about becoming more complete, gaining access to intuition, emotional depth, creativity, and inner wisdom that had previously been locked away in the unconscious. When this integration begins to happen, something remarkable occurs. The anima stops appearing, only as an illusion projected onto other people. She begins to function instead as an inner companion, an intuitive sense that guides decisions, deepens creativity, and brings emotional insight that logic alone could never provide. She stops being a fantasy a man chases externally and becomes a strength he carries internally. It is worth asking why these ideas, developed a century ago in a very different world, feel more relevant today than ever. We live now inside a culture of curated images, dating applications that reduce human beings to swipeable profiles, social media platforms that present idealized, filtered versions of people rather than their full complexity. Loneliness has become, by many measures, an epidemic, even as digital connection has never been more constant. Emotional dependency on validation, likes, matches, attention has quietly replaced deeper forms of intimacy for many people. Unrealistic expectations, shaped by algorithms designed to show the most polished version of everyone, have made ordinary human imperfection feel almost unacceptable. In many ways, modern digital culture has become a perfect breeding ground for unconscious anima. Projection at a scale Jung could scarcely have imagined. A profile picture, carefully chosen and filtered, becomes an ideal screen for projection long before two people ever actually meet. The gap between the image and the person often becomes greater than ever, and the disillusionment that follows often becomes more common, more repetitive, and more painful. Jung's century-old psychology, in other words, may be more useful now than when he first wrote it, not as an outdated theory, but as a lens capable of explaining exactly why modern love so often feels simultaneously abundant and empty. There is a strange kind of comfort hidden inside all of this. The ache you may have felt, the searching, the heartbreak, the impossible longing for someone who could complete you, was never really evidence that something was wrong with you. It was evidence that something within you was asking to be known. Jung once suggested that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we'll call it fate. Perhaps what feels like fate in love is not fate at all, but an invitation again and again to finally turn inward and meet the part of yourself you have spent a lifetime searching for in someone else's eyes. She was never only out there. She was always, quietly, waiting within. If this journey into Jung's psychology helped you see yourself differently, consider subscribing for more explorations into timeless wisdom, the unconscious mind, and the path toward individuation.